All right, guys. So for today's video, we're going to go over net neutrality because this is something that popped up quite some years ago, and it recently just reared its ugly head again. So let's go ahead and figure out what's going on now. So at the time of recording this, I saw a news article that the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, is going to reinstate net neutrality. But we got to do a little bit of digging before we can get to the core of this video and figure out what that means and what's really going on. So again, the FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. And the whole point of the FCC is to monitor and, I guess you can say, inspect all forms of communication that take place within the borders and territories of the US. So this naturally includes all communication and like web communication. Well, we don't use them anymore, but if you still do, they can even monitor house calls like landline phone calls, cellular phone calls, email, text messages, TV, radio, all forms of communication. The FCC is able to monitor and inspect it. With that said, we can just go right over to figure out what net neutrality is. So I'm probably going to dig more into this because I remember some years ago, not recently, it was some years ago, when net neutrality was brought up. I remember seeing posts about it on Instagram when it came up, and I didn't understand what was going on and why people were lobbying either for it or against it. So now I'm just kind of figuring this out. So when it comes to communicating over the internet, text messages, emails, and all that stuff, or even when it comes to just using streaming platforms, when you use all these different apps and services, your internet provider can basically add a certain level of priority depending on the app that you're using or the website you're using. For example, in my last apartment complex, the first place I lived in for a few years, one of the things that I liked about that place, well, rather one of the things I liked about my internet service provider, which I went with AT&T at the time. What I liked about AT&T and what persuaded me to end up going with that package, or I guess AT&T and HBO Max had a partnership where if you signed up for AT&T as your service provider for your internet, that you would automatically get HBO Max for free. This was obviously prior to the HBO Max and Discovery Plus merger, which led to the now current platform, Max, which is controlled by Warner Brothers Discovery, which was also created as a result of that merger. And what net neutrality does is it would prevent AT&T, hypothetically, I don't know if they've actually done this, it would prevent AT&T from prioritizing all web traffic that, of course, they're providing the internet service. So they low-key can control how things, run and how things perform. And what net neutrality does is it stops AT&T from hypothetically boosting your experience with HBO Max, or let's even say Max nowadays, because AT&T has a partnership with them. If you were to sign up for AT&T to be your provider for your internet service, and they also have a deal or a partnership with Netflix, Max, HBO Max, Stars, or anything like that, and they have that type of deal where, hey, anytime that someone signs up for you to be their internet service provider, automatically give them a free account so they can watch the Stars content, the HBO Max or Max content, whatever other streaming service, Amazon Prime. You automatically want the content and the experience with that platform to be good, because if things are good with the platform that they're giving you a free account to, then your experience with AT&T is going to be good, which is going to entice you to want to keep them as your internet service provider long term. Hopefully that all made sense. Basically, and I'm sure we've all seen versions of this, where if someone's like, hey, if you sign up with us, we'll give you a free account to buy discounted clothes or to stream, these movies and TV shows for free or at a reduced price. But then when you try to use that service, it doesn't even work. So now you're like, well, what was the point of this whole benefit? It's not even working right. The traffic is slow. The app crashes every time I'm on my game system, my TV, wherever the case is. It doesn't really, like, this platform doesn't work. So what was the whole benefit of this whole deal? So the whole position of hypothetically AT&T or just a service provider would be to boost your experience with the company that they have a partnership with, because when that company looks good, AT&T or Verizon or whoever you're getting your internet from, they look good by default, versus you signed up for that deal, you try to use whatever benefit that they said that you're going to get, and it turns out to not even be that good. And that was probably the one thing that got you to sign up with them in the first place. So now you're looking like, this benefit's not even working. So why should I? if at this point I'm just paying, for the regular everyday internet, I'm not even getting the benefit. If I wanted to go with the most financially secure option, I probably should have went with your competitor. That's usually why they do that. Allowing or enabling net neutrality puts power into the hands of internet service providers so that they can either boost or reduce your internet traffic depending on what platform you're trying to use. I'm pretty sure there's a level of things kind of just being normal, but again, if the internet traffic or the platforms you're using somehow benefit your service provider, they have the ability through net neutrality, by it being disabled, rather, I said enabled, by it being disabled, they would have the power to be like, oh, they're trying to use the streaming service that we gave them a deal for. Go ahead and boost that up because it'll make us look good and they'll be more likely to stay with us long term. But when you enable net neutrality, the opposite happens. When net neutrality is enabled, which it either is or is going to be once again, when net neutrality is enabled, it basically shuts all this down. All net traffic is equal, it gets treated the same. You can't say, they're going to use this platform that we have a partnership with, so make that look good. Everything else keep normal, or even make it look bad if they're going to a competitor. They can't do that anymore. Now they just have to let the traffic be whatever it is, and everything has to perform naturally and equally as we would expect it to be. If I was to go to, again, HBO Max, sticking with the AT&T example, and back when they had that partnership with HBO Max, they can no longer say, oh, this person's trying to use HBO Max, boost the traffic so that, it looks good on their end. Now it's just, we have to let it be what it is. If it's good, great. If it's not that good, well, we can't necessarily do anything about it unless it's an outage. If it's an outage, that's a technical issue with AT&T, Verizon, or whoever you're paying to get your internet service. But if it's kind of just regular network traffic that no one can necessarily do anything about, well, it just is what it is. That also means that they can't see that you're maybe trying to watch something on Netflix and sabotage them by reducing the traffic, which would make your experience with Netflix bad. That would also be in benefit to its competitors. Hence why net neutrality sometimes is considered a big deal and a big argument for certain people, mainly tech companies. Whether or not this is a good change might just be a matter of perspective. For me, I don't think anything of it. As long as my streaming services and everything I use is working normal, I really don't care like how fast they are. I'm not, super detail oriented and nitty gritty like that. As long as I'm not waiting 5 minutes for a single episode of a show or a movie, whatever, to launch, I'm fine. But if I have to wait 10, 15 seconds, yeah, okay, I might start to think, just because we're so spoiled these days, I might start to wonder, like, is something wrong here? Like, why is this not loading? But you know what? I'll give it a second. Especially if you see that wheel that has a percentage and it's like 1%, 5%, 10%, 15, 25. It's like, okay, cool. As long as it's moving at a good pace, it's fine. But if it's super slow and it's like on 1% and it stays there for like 5 to 10 minutes, that's when it's going to be like, okay, what the heck is going on here? And that's when I may start to get, a little irritated with the situation. As long as that type of extreme situation doesn't happen, personally, I don't think I care about net neutrality being enabled again. So maybe it's a personal preference. There is an idea, maybe philosophy, but there is an idea that net neutrality and having it disabled, meaning our web traffic can be influenced and kind of controlled a little bit, it's actually in the benefit of us as customers and consumers. Because again, depending on like whatever business deals that these companies have behind closed doors and stuff like that, when you use certain platforms and maybe you use certain streamers, certain streaming services more than others, maybe the streaming service that you use the most, you always have a good time with. 8 to 9 times out of 10, it's one you use. You probably have 3, 4 other ones that you can use. You probably just don't use them nearly as much. So your experience with the one streamer that you do use a lot will probably be great. Like your experience with it, the speed and the quality of everything will be immaculate all the time. And if your performance with other streaming services isn't quite as good, you're probably not going to trip off it because you're like, I barely use this account like this anyway. So I'll just go back to my main one and I'll just stick to it there and I'll be satisfied. Right. So it might just depend on each person and how y'all use your different streaming services and stuff like that. Personally, again, while I have multiple accounts, as long as they all behave pretty equally, they're not constantly crashing, and I don't have to wait 10 minutes for just the most regular TV show episode and movies and stuff. Personally, I think I'm gonna be okay since net neutrality either is enabled or will be enabled again. But for some people, this is actually a pretty big deal. So there may be more to keep up with here. But I'm gonna go ahead and leave this off here, guys. If you have any feedback or questions or comments for me, leave that for me in the comment section below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.